Help is on the way, my friends. I had no idea when I started talking about divine healing that I would have so many stories that either had happened to me and my family or through my own ministry or people that I know that have been healed by the power of God and miracles have taken place in their lives. I have spoken to some about what I call the $1 million option on this series. And if you follow through on this message, I will explain what that is. But I want to start with this particular story. These were some people who came to visit us in our church quite a few years ago. In fact, I was having some cable TV shows here at the time called Fireside Faith, which is the name that I've used through many years and in several cities where I put television messages out or videos out on YouTube or whatever for people to see. And these people came to visit our church, and I had them on our TV show here locally, the cable station, Fireside Faith. Her name was Hannah, brother and sister Hannah, Sister Hannah. And she told a miraculous story of healing. They really weren't that much church people, at least not people who believed in divine healing. If they had any religion, it was more formal. But they became attracted. What happened? She had diseased kidneys. In fact, she was facing death. I don't know for sure that even she could be helped with medical science. I don't know that she could be put on the machines and her blood cured and so on and put through the dialysis, I think they call it. But at least she went to the doctor. Her kidneys were x-rayed and she had damaged kidneys, I think both kidneys, if I remember right. One was barely functioning. The other was pretty well completely gone. And she had the x-ray evidence of that. They x-rayed her kidneys. She was not really an old lady at the time, but they x-rayed her kidneys, and right on the x-ray, the doctor pointed out to her how that one kidney was all shriveled up. It wasn't functioning at all. The other kidney was barely functioning, and I'm not sure even that she was in the state that a organ transplant would have helped her life or saved her life, but she was in dire circumstances. And they went to church. They went to a church that apparently believed in divine healing, and I'm not sure if they went a couple of times or not. But her story actually takes place in the entryway or the vestibule of the church. I think church was started already in this one day, and she was met by one of the ushers out in the large entryway to the church, and apparently they either knew her condition or she told them about her condition. And if I remember correctly, right there in the entry of the church, not the minister, not some well-established church members, but this usher of the church said, well, if you believe in God, you can be healed. And I think, if I remember the story right, he prayed for them and for her right in the entryway of the church. Now, I don't know that she felt or knew that anything had happened. But anyhow, in the course of her medical treatment, she went back to the doctor. And another follow-up x-ray was taken, part of her treatment, to see how she was progressing and if there was any chance of her survival. She was dying, really. And they took another x-ray. And it's been so long ago, and I think I might have had this story put on videotape a long time ago, a different format video. I can't access it right now to refresh myself. But I think that she had another x-ray, and the doctor was amazed. And he said, something's happened to you. And so he put up the x-rays, and she remembered seeing the former x-rays, and there were the place in the x-ray where her kidneys were. And she looked at the x-ray and she said, Doctor, you mean to say those are my kidneys? She said on the x-ray you could see two well-formed, fully developed, fully functional kidneys on the x-ray. And the doctor says, yes, those are your kidneys. Now, I don't know that I can fill in all the details of the story, but from that day till the time I met her, which was several years, she lived a normal life with both kidneys functioning well, healthy and strong, and going they eventually got into a form of ministry where they visited churches and told her story and ministered in music and song and the word. And when she came to us, she said it was an absolute miracle. And she'd been going several years with miracle kidneys created by the power of simply an usher's prayer in the vestibule or entryway of a big church. You see, the prayer of faith, this is what we're basing this whole series on, is the Bible, the book of James, where he said, the prayer of faith shall save the sick. Now, the proper form is to lay hands on the sick, anoint them with oil, let the elders pray over them, and they will recover. But how many of you know that God isn't necessarily stuck to one form? His supernatural power is able to operate. And so we are launching out to believe that God can operate his power even through prayers that are said over the telephone. That's the heart of our message. If we, the person on the other end of the telephone as well, maybe some family members that are on a conference call with us, have faith and pray the prayer of faith, God said, I will heal the sick. It doesn't mean they might be healed within the next 2 minutes, but he said, I'll heal the sick and I'll raise them up. And if they have committed sins, shall be forgiven them. And of course, that part of the scripture, if they've committed sins, they shall be forgiven them. That's what we'll talk about a little bit later on the $1 million option. So I tell people, hey, these videos will help your faith and build you up and entertain you, these stories, even if you don't go for the $1 million option, but we hope you will. Now, I remember in my own experience, when our son, we had one son, we, since that time, a few years later, had a daughter, but we had one child, a son, Nathan. He was a fine boy. We look back now and realize that he was exceptionally a good child. He was mischievous like boys are, and very active, loved sports, and loved to be doing things, and of course was always interested in getting into something, so he was into troubles and mischievous things all the time. But I'll start sort of in the middle or the end of my story. We lived in the church house, which was only about 5 or 6 houses up the street from the church that I pastored. It was the first church of that first Pentecostal church of that city. That was the capital city, so it was probably the lead church in our whole area. I had a congregation of somewhere between 250 and 350. The church seated close to 300 and was usually packed out on a Sunday night. And our Sunday school on Sunday morning, which not everybody attended the Sunday school part of the service, because we had Sunday school and morning worship and then evening service. And so there'd be quite a few people come for the morning service, maybe the evening service. They wouldn't come for the Sunday school hour. But we would have 280, 285 in Sunday school. So our church functioned about 300 people. And we just lived up the street. And so we had services, 3 services on Sunday and 2 more services through the week usually. And it was a youth service night at the church. And I was home. My wife wanted to go to the service, so she dressed up. But I was home, and our son was maybe, I don't know, 5 years old. I'm not sure. Anyhow, I was home, and I was taking care of him. Now, what I was actually doing, I was cleaning up my tools in the garage. And I was working in the garage, wiping up the tools, oiling them up, and putting them in order. And he came out to the garage, and he saw the grass shears there, the clippers that you clip long grass with, And he said, I like to use those clippers and cut some grass. And I said, Nathan, they're not very safe. I don't think you should. Oh, please, Dad. So I said, well, okay, be careful. And so he took the shears, those big, long, what they are, like great, huge set of scissors, grass shears, clippers, And the step to the garage was up a step. It was raised up from the ground, one step up. And he took those shears in his hand, and I wasn't being that careful to watch what he was doing, but apparently he had them, held them the wrong way. And when he stepped out, that step down, he lost his balance, and he fell onto the point of the grass shears. And it pierced his eye. And immediately he screamed, and he said, "Oh, Dad, I put the shears in my eye." Well, he was holding over his eye, and I had to try to pry his hand out to see, and all I could see was a drop of blood on the eyeball of his eye. And I thought, oh my God, has that child fallen on those grass shears and put out his eye? He'll be blind in that eye the rest of his life. Well, I went into, and I was dressed in the dirtiest old clothes because I was rubbing oil on the tools. So I had old greasy clothes on, old greasy shirt. And but I had to run up the street quick to get my wife from the youth service to head for the emergency ward of the hospital. Well, that's the middle of the story. There's a lot that preceded that. Our son Nathan, as I said, was a good kid, a very good kid, and he turned out to be a fine son. But he was, as most boys, he was active and he was mischievous, and he was always getting into trouble. He was accident prone. We had a couple of small dogs, hound dogs, elk hounds, I believe they were, and they were a kind of a pair, and we kept them. That's when we lived over at the Bible college, in the big Bible college dorm, and we kept them kind of out back and fed them outdoors. They were outdoors a lot of the time. And one day I was feeding the two dogs. They had two different food dishes, and they were a couple of feet apart. And they weren't mean dogs. They were not. They were used to Nathan and used to us, and they were nice dogs. But the two dog dishes were just 2 or 3 feet apart, and Nathan, our son, got in between them somehow, and one of the dogs went to growl. The other one got a little too close to his dog dish, whatever, and one went to bite at the other dog, growl and bite. He didn't bite Nathan, but one of the dog teeth, a large tooth, went right in between the forefinger and the thumb and just caught Nathan and pierced the skin and brought the blood. And of course, we had to take him to the hospital and get a tetanus shot because we weren't sure that he would get disease from being accidentally bitten. The dog didn't mean to bite him, so it didn't clamp down, and so it just caught the tooth right there when it turned. And we had to get him to have a shot at the hospital so he wouldn't come down with, I guess it's tetanus. But anyhow, that was one. Now, even a year or a few months before that, at the Bible college, I said 5. I think I was, it could have been 5 when he fell on the grass shears. But this happened when he was 3 years old because we left the Bible school and went to the church across the river, the big church that I was talking about, First Pentecostal Church of Fredericton. And it was there that he had the grass shear experience. But this is going back a couple of years. So he got the dog bite. He had to have a shot at the hospital. He was riding his little tricycle because we had a big wall along the stepway at the front. You came up a whole series of stairs into this huge big building that was our Bible college, 3 stories high. But you had to come up a set of stairs, cement stairs, to level 1. And then there was a full basement, which was actually the basement level was level 1, and then this was the main floor, and then there was a 3rd floor. So you had to come up a series of steps. Then there was a wall that went around the walkway that came up there, a wall, a couple of feet apart or whatever, a couple of feet wide rather. And he had a new tricycle, and he got riding around that wall on the tricycle and got a little too close to the edge and upset and went down off of the little wall and hit on a stone and slashed his forehead open. And the blood was running over his face, and we had to run into the hospital. I think he had 4 or 5 stitches to stitch up that cut in his forehead from falling off his tricycle onto a sharp rock and cutting open his forehead. We went into a shoe store right around the same time. He's 3, 4 years old. And while we weren't watching, looking for shoes or something, he kind of slipped around the counter, and he saw that little glass. Now, we used little small glasses for communion in the church, and we had grape juice in the glasses. That's how we served communion. And I guess he was used to that, maybe seeing the communion glasses, knowing that that was grape juice, good to drink. And he saw this little glass, and it had this bright red liquid in it. And he thought, well, that must be communion, grape juice. And so when the shoe manager wasn't watching, and we weren't watching, he slipped around behind the counter, picked up that little glass and drank it, and it was very poisonous shoe dye. It was a red shoe dye. And when the manager found out about it, we were in a emergency hysteria. And he said, we got to get him to the hospital. That could kill him. And they had to put a tube down and try to pump his stomach out because that was a kind of a poisonous liquid. And fortunately, they were able to save him and get that out. And he did not have long-lasting results from drinking the poisonous shoe dye in the shoe store. And it was just one thing after another. He was playing with, beans, dried beans, and he put one in his ear, and he got it in too far, and he couldn't get it out. And we had to go to the hospital and get the doctor to reach in there with some kind of a sharp instrument and get a hold of that bean and pull it out of his ear. And I suppose there were others. I would tire you telling you how many of these incidents we had with our son. Well, the grass shear one was the one that really got to me. And I realized that the child was accident prone. And on the way to the hospital, a sense of the presence of God came over me, and I felt a rebuke for the devil. And I prayed while we were driving to the hospital. It was a mile or two to the hospital. And I said, devil, you've been afflicting this boy and troubling this boy with one accident and one emergency after another. He's been in the hospital and in the emergency ward again and again for one thing or another. And I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. You take your hand off this boy's life and let this stop. Well, that was the end of his accidents. I think after that, I only remember one single thing. He was around some old storm windows that we had taken off in the wintertime, and somehow there was a piece of broken glass there, and he managed to step on it and cut his foot. And that's the last accident I remember. Anyhow, the eye accident, we got to the doctor, and they examined it carefully, and they said, well, the blade did not hardly pierce the eyeball. And it's just a very surface cut. How that happened, oh God, how that happened, I don't know. And I think he was almost killed on the street one day when a car was racing up the street, and he raced out to get a ball or something, and his mother was standing on the side of the street, and she just screamed, Jesus, help us. And somehow that car that was speeding up our street came to a stop just, she said, inches from hitting that child. But anyhow, after that prayer on the way to the hospital, all those accidents stopped, except that one time that he did cut his foot on some glass. He's a fine man today, grown strong and well. And God reached into the spirit world and pushed those evil forces back that were attacking that child and causing him to have one accident and one visit to the hospital emergency ward after another. Psalm 103 verse 3 says, who forgiveth all thine iniquities. That's the $1 million option. And who healeth all thy diseases. And 103 verse 2 says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. If you don't believe in healing, you're throwing away a lot of the blessings of God. Two world religions, major world religions, have healing sewn into the very fabric of their religion, the Jewish faith and the Christian faith. And I want to tell you that healings are part of the plan of God. If you go back to the Jewish faith, the first story of healing, a sort of a healing, was in Genesis 16:7, when the son of Abraham and Hagar, because of Hagar's bad attitude, she was the slave woman, and Abraham and Sarah sent her out from her house because her son was older, and he was kind of picking on Isaac, the full-blooded son, the full-born son of Abraham and Sarah. And so Sarah said, you got to send her away because this boy is causing so much trouble for our son Isaac. And so Hagar and Ishmael were sent away with some blessings and some financial help. But as they traveled, they found themselves crossing a desert area, and they ran out of water. And it was hot. And the boy was thirsty and fainting. And Hagar sat down. She had no solution to the problem. And she sat down on the sand, and she said, we're going to die here. This is where we're going to die, because we have no water and there's nobody near. And as she sat there, an angel of the Lord, even though Ishmael was not the chosen son, the angel of the Lord came to her and said, Hagar, what are you doing? She said, I'm sitting here waiting to die. I have no water. And the angel of the Lord brought her water, or showed her water, and she was able to quench their thirst and go on their journey. And of course, they've become a great people today as well. So the angel of the Lord found her by the fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur. And in 8th verse of Genesis 16, he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, it says, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarah. And the angel said, well, look, there's water over there. And he directed her to water, and she survived. That's a miracle of God. And the Bible is full of them. It's full of them. And God has one for you. That's the good news. God has one for you. I was pastoring another fine church in the city of Winnipeg in Canada, Zion Apostolic Church. And again, it was a brand new church building. Wonderful, wonderful church. I had about 400 to 500 people before I left there. We had kind of a revival in that church. And not too long after I became the pastor, I became aware of a story which ended in a healing. The young lady, unmarried lady, I will call her Teresa, came to me. She came back to church. Her family had been in a church, maybe not that church, I don't know. And something had happened in the church, and they were upset with the church or the pastor or the people, and they left. She was just a teenager, and they left church, and for years they were outside the church, and she was maybe in the vicinity of 19, 20, 21. I don't know her exact age at the time. But for years she hadn't gone to church. But when she was younger, she had been in church and gone to Sunday school. And of course, she had gotten away from church, and she was kind of out in the world and with worldly people, and loved parties. And it was the middle of winter. And winter is unbelievably cold in that city and that country. I remember one year while we were there, for the month of December and January and February, I believe, the mean temperature for those 3 months, each month, was 29 degrees below zero. Now, I know that mean is not quite the same as average, but think of that, that the temperature got so cold and never got warm enough that the temperature in the middle was 29 degrees below zero. Now that's really cold. And I believe that was probably the Fahrenheit scale, which means that it freezes at 32, and this was 60 degrees below freezing. Man, with wind, that was cold. It was a cold country. Anyhow, she was in maybe early adulthood, 19, 20, 21, 22 years of age, and one day she was offered a ride by a young man that she knew. He wasn't a stranger, and he offered to take her for a ride. I don't know that it was meant to be a date or whatever, but anyhow, he drove her way out in a country place, and then he got her out of the car and he assaulted her. He stripped off her clothes, he raped her, and he cut her throat. And she passed out, and he thought she was dead, so he left her there. And she's laying there naked. There was probably some snow on the ground, and it was freezing cold. And she felt as though a hand or something was coming near her or touching her. And she thought, oh no, he's come back again. And then as she regained her consciousness, she realized it wasn't the young man. He was gone. And it was probably the hand of God awakening her so she wouldn't freeze to death. So she got up on her feet, still without any clothes, and she started to walk. And those bare feet on that ice and snow, already half frozen, and she realized that she could not last long. She'd die and be frozen to death if she didn't find help real soon. So she came to a fork in the road, and she kind of prayed and said, God, I got to know which way to go because I got to get help real quick or I'm going to freeze to death. And she felt to go one way, and she went that road, and just around the bend, there was a farmhouse. And she went to the farmhouse, and the man and his wife quickly saw her plight, wrapped her in blankets, rushed her off to the hospital. And of course, she survived. Her life was saved. But her feet and lower part of her legs had been so badly damaged by the cold, almost frozen, that the circulation in her legs, the arteries and blood vessels, had been damaged permanently. And she lived with a numbness and a lack of circulation in her legs and her feet. And the doctors had checked her out several times, and the only solution they had to offer, they said, well, maybe we can go in there and strip some of those veins out and some of those arteries out or whatever and replace them with other arteries and increase your circulation. And she was suffering a lot of distress from this. Anyhow, I knew a little bit about her story, and she refreshed it to us. The service was out, probably a Sunday morning church service, and the church was big, like I said, about 500 people. And there was a large vegetable entryway in that church because people came in with big heavy coats and hats and overshoes and things like that they had to take off when they came into the sanctuary for church. It was warm in the building, but extremely cold outside. And so there was a big entryway, and the people were everywhere. Church was out, and they were all talking and fellowshipping and around. And my wife and I think my wife was with me at this moment, and Teresa came up, and she said, Pastor, I may have to go to the doctor and have some very difficult surgery to have my blood vessels, my arteries stripped out and replaced because I can't get circulation to my feet because of this frost damage that was done to my legs and my feet. And of course, she had come back to the Lord and back to church at that time, and I knew who she was. And I said, well, why don't we pray? And so right there with everybody milling around us, everybody talking, nobody was paying much attention. I believe it was my wife and I, we laid hands on her and said, in the name of Jesus, do a miracle for this young woman. Well, we didn't push her like they do in a lot of these Pentecostal services. We didn't try to make her fall down. She just fell down. She just collapsed. Of course, it was such a nice church, and there was carpet on the floor and all of that, but she just fell down on the floor. And she was only out for just a minute, almost like she passed out. I didn't knock her out. Just the power of God struck her. And in just a matter of a couple minutes, she came back to and got up. And she says, oh, I feel just a tingling in my legs and my feet. And guess what? She was 100% healed in that moment of time. She went back to the doctors. They checked it out, said, circulation's great. You're not going to need any surgery. And she went on to serve the Lord. I believe that later on she found a fine young man, and I married them in that church while I was still pastoring. They sang in the choir. They're great people, went on to serve the Lord. But God did that miracle of healing in her body in a matter of 30 seconds when the power of God came on her through the prayer of faith. Now, God can do what he did for Teresa, he can do for you. He can give you a miracle because the prayer of faith will save the sick and the Lord shall raise them up. If you believe, and I believe, maybe some of your family believes, we'll get everybody on the phone. We'll pray over the phone for you, and God will keep his word. If the prayer of faith goes up to heaven, the healing will come down. Not every healing will be a miracle. It'll take a little while for some people to recover, but some of them will be miracles. It'll take 10 seconds. And it'll be over. Hallelujah. Because that's the power of God. Oh, I feel it now, even as I talk to you. What a great story. Now, I have to talk to you a little bit about the million dollar draw. Because I've said this to people. Well, you'll enjoy the stories, even if you don't go for the $1 million option. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the fact that not only does God heal physical bodies, but he saves the human soul from damnation and hell because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Now, when I say the $1 million option, that is an exaggeration in reverse. It's worth a lot more than $1 million. What I'm saying is, the day comes when you stand before God in the judgment. And let's say you don't take the $1 million option. You're not saved. And God says, I'm sorry, you don't have the new life, the new birth that I offered you. You lived your life and didn't pay attention to it. And now you're standing before me and you're not saved. So you're going to go with the evil people, although you may not be evil. You're going to go with the evil people and spend eternity in hell. Now, how much would it be worth to you on that day if you had the money to buy your way out? How much would you give? I say $1 million. I say if you had $1 trillion, you'd give it to be saved on that day. That's what I call the $1 million option. Now, that goes way beyond healing of your body. That's the saving of your soul. And of course, when I offer this, I'm simply quoting and refreshing your mind of the words of Jesus, because he's the one that made the offer. He said in Mark 8:36, what will you gain if you own the whole world but forfeit your soul? Now, actually, the translation I was giving there actually had, but destroy yourself. But I like the other translations which ends, and lose his own soul. And this one says, forfeit his soul. What would it profit you if you if you owned the entire world and you stand before God in the judgment and you're lost? What would you pay not to go to hell? He said, you would pay all the money in the world if you had it to escape eternal judgment. That's the $1 million option. It's an exaggeration in reverse. It should be called really the $1 trillion option, but we don't think of a draw that involves $1 trillion. So I just said the $1 million option. That's the option God is giving you beyond the healing of your body, the salvation of your soul. That's the $1 million option.